On November 19th, 2024, Jaguar, one of Britain's most prestigious car companies, released a video that, instead of featuring a new car, showed a group of androgynous models in wildly colorful outfits posing in an elevator and prancing around in what looked like a child's playroom. Slogans flashed across the screen that read, "Copy nothing," "Delete ordinary," and "Break molds." The iconic leaping cat that had historically served as a hood ornament called the Jaguar Leaper was replaced with a minimalist Jaguar wordmark in mixed upper and lowercase letters. As many of you already know, the internet exploded with mockery and outrage. Marketing professionals blew up LinkedIn, many calling it possibly the stupidest marketing decision they had ever seen. And design experts called the redesign a travesty. But Jaguar's managing director, Rawdon Glover, who had been in the job for less than 2 years, stood resolute, then replied to the angry masses with these simple words: "We had no choice but to be fearless." Then he doubled down, saying Jaguar was willing to lose 85% of their current customers to save the brand. Critics declared it brand suicide, and headlines screamed Jaguar had lost its way and was abandoning their heritage. But here's what I've learned after studying fear and corporate failure. Sometimes what looks like the worst possible move is actually the bravest. And sometimes the seeds that caused a company to lose its way have been planted decades earlier and nurtured by fear at every crucial decision point. Hey everyone, I'm Terrace Wayner, and welcome to another episode of A Case Study in Corporate Fear, where I do the forensics to better understand how and why fear transforms brave leaders of thriving companies into spineless failures of corporate catastrophes. Also, you never make the same mistakes. And while most know the names of epic fails like Blockbuster, Tower Records, Sony, and Kodak, what most don't know is that the true mastermind behind their collapse was fear. Today's case study is Jaguar. And this isn't another skewering of their controversial 2024 rebrand that everyone's been mocking and wrongfully blaming for their collapse in sales. It's actually quite the opposite. This story is about how patterns of fear systematically chipped away at one of the world's most iconic brands for decades, and how their rebrand just might have been the most courageous business decision the company has made in a long time. But before we analyze how Jaguar became a declawed house cat, we need to understand what an absolutely dominant force the Jaguar company once was. Founded in 1922 as the Swallow Sidecar Company by Sir William Lyons, the company quickly became synonymous with a very specific kind of automotive excellence that came to be called sophisticated rebellion. Sir Lyons was just 21 years old when he co-founded the company, but even as a young man, he possessed an almost supernatural understanding of what made objects beautiful. While he wasn't an engineer by training, he was obsessed with flowing lines and perfect proportions. Lyons believed that cars should be sculptures that happened to move, not just machines that happened to look decent. And his inspiration came from unlikely sources like the grace of actual Jaguars, the fluid power, the coiled tension, the predatory elegance, and his vision was to capture that essence in metal and chrome. Lyons understood something deeper about luxury that would come to define his company. That truly desirable cars shouldn't just transport their owners, they should transform them. Step into a Lyons design car and you are buying an identity. This philosophy would guide every design decision he made for the next 40 years, creating cars that made their drivers feel beautiful, powerful, and just dangerous enough to be interesting. Jaguar initially appeared as a model name called the SS Jaguar 2.5-liter Saloon. But after World War II, Lyons changed the company name from Swallow Sidecar Company to Jaguar Cars Limited in order to avoid the unfortunate connotations with the Nazi SS. Lyons' breakthrough came in 1948 with the XK120. It was the fastest production car in the world, capable of reaching 120 miles per hour when most cars struggled to reach 80. But speed was only part of the story. The XK120 was devastatingly beautiful, with flowing lines that seemed to capture motion even when standing still. Then came the racing dominance. The C-Type won Le Mans in 1951 and 1953. And the D-Type followed with victories in 55, 56, and 57. Lyons cars were seen as expressions of British engineering artistry that proved beauty and performance weren't just compatible, they were inseparable. But Jaguar's masterstroke came in 1961 with the E-Type. Enzo Ferrari himself called it the most beautiful car ever made. What made Jaguar truly revolutionary was that they understood something profound about luxury that others missed. It was that there was a select group that wasn't looking to just buy a car. They wanted to buy what the car stood for and what its builders believed. And Jaguar believed their car was for a driver who wasn't just wealthy and sophisticated, but also a little bit villainous. It was refined British power, but with a predatory edge. Savile Row tailoring with brass knuckles in the pocket. Jaguar had created something intoxicating, and Hollywood took notice immediately. Starting in the 1960s, Jaguars became the vehicle of choice for cinema's most compelling antagonists. The E-Type prowled through the Italian Job in 1969, and the XJS menaced heroes in countless thrillers throughout the 1970s and 1980s. When screenwriters needed a car that whispered elegant threat, they wrote in a Jaguar. And it was beautifully captured in their Good to Be Bad ad campaign, in which British actors Tom Hiddleston and Ben Kingsley portrayed suave villains. Owning a Jaguar meant you were successful enough to afford luxury, confident enough to handle power, and interesting enough to be slightly dangerous. You weren't just a person with a car, you were a person with a story. But even while they dominated culture, there were warning signs that were missed that put them on a collision course with extinction, and the seeds of what was causing it had been planted over the entire history of the car. To flag the first major fear-driven decision that knocked the car off course, we have to jump back to the mid-1960s when Jaguar was thriving, but the automotive world was going through rapid consolidation. General Motors and Ford were becoming global giants with resources that dwarfed even successful independents like Jaguar. And Lyons watched as other independent British car companies struggled or disappeared entirely. He watched as Austin Healey, MG, and other beloved brands got absorbed into the British Motor Corporation just to survive. And it wasn't long before Sir William Lyons faced a similar choice. He could keep Jaguar independent or merge with British Motor Corporation as well and form a new company called British Motor Holdings. The Jaguar board convinced Lyons that in order to compete with the larger organizations, the logical and rational thing to do was to join forces. So despite his gut instincts telling him to not do the merger, Lyons agreed to it anyway. The Jaguar board wasn't entirely wrong. They saw independent car companies being left behind in the technology race. Things like electronic fuel injection, advanced transmissions, and emerging safety technologies were becoming more complex and expensive to implement, and building them demanded capital that strained Jaguar's resources. The BMC team promised the merger would deliver economies of scale, shared development costs, and access to a broader dealer network. On paper, it looked like the prudent choice for a responsible businessman protecting his company's future. But here's what Lyons couldn't have predicted. By choosing the safety of a merger, he was trading Jaguar's most valuable asset, its independence and ability to make quick and bold decisions. It was the illusion of security. And what he got was the beginning of a bureaucratic nightmare that wound up strangling innovation. Right out of the gate, the merger was a disaster, but it was not only the fault of the carmaker. That same year, the British government's credit squeeze depressed the car market, leading to continuous strikes that disrupted production. British Motor Holdings' market share dropped 27%, followed by an even greater loss the following year. Then the British government stepped in to try and help. I know what you're thinking. What could possibly go wrong? Anyway, what they wanted was another merger to create even a bigger company. The government's hope was that the merger would create a streamlined, single British automotive giant that could compete with American manufacturers. So, in 1968, British Motor Holdings merged with Leyland to form British Leyland Motor Corporation. Despite bitter hostility between the companies, the decision to merge was forced through. The goal was to save British automotive manufacturing, but it actually created an unwieldy conglomerate that soon collapsed and required government nationalization in order to save it. In the span of just a few years, Jaguar went from an independent force to a tiny division inside a massive, dysfunctional conglomerate. But the real damage to the Jaguar brand was just starting. One of British Leyland management's biggest concerns was internal competition between brands. And after all the mergers, when they looked at their portfolio, they saw chaos. They worried that Jaguar competed with Rover at the luxury end, Triumph overlapped with Austin and Morris, and MG sports cars would wind up cannibalizing the sales of all of the above. But rather than letting the best products win and kill off the weakest brands, management chose the path of least resistance. They would manage the competition by controlling how much each brand could spend. So, despite being one of the few genuinely profitable parts of the empire, Jaguar found itself being treated like just another division, rather than the crown jewel it actually was. This led to development budgets being slashed, not because Jaguar was failing, but because executives grew anxious that a truly excellent new Jaguar might steal sales from their other car lines. Their logic was tragically flawed. Instead of building on their strengths, BLMC was systematically weakening their most valuable assets to protect their least valuable ones. But then again, if you are a bureaucrat, it was completely understandable. Anyway, as you could imagine, the results were catastrophic. During the 1970s, Jaguar's production stagnated at around 24,000 cars annually. Quality suffered from what internal documents called a demotivated workforce. But here's the truly maddening part. This was the era when the Jaguar XJ6 was rated the best car in the world. The XJ6 represented everything Jaguar did best, distilled into one magnificent machine. It was one of the final Jaguars that Sir William Lyons personally designed and is considered by many to be his masterpiece. Its flowing lines seemed to defy physics, appearing to move even when parked. Under the hood sat Jaguar's legendary straight-six engine, delivering a combination of power and refinement. Road and Track called it the finest car in the world, and Motor Trend declared it virtually flawless. Yet this automotive masterpiece was being assembled by workers who had lost faith in their management and being built on production lines that dated back to before World War II. The workforce had little respect for management and was quite willing to walk out and strike, even if it meant losing pay, just to spite leadership. Customers summed up the problem perfectly. They loved the performance and refinement of Jaguar, but hated the unreliability. The effect was an inevitable drop in sales. By 1977, Jaguar was producing about one-third fewer cars than they built at the beginning of the decade. And much of this decline can be blamed on the company's inability to make hard decisions. When strikes shut down production, management was afraid to confront the unions. When quality problems emerged, they were hesitant to overhaul the system. And when customers complained, they were unable to face or admit the scope of the problems. Jaguar had become a culture where protecting the status quo became more important than serving customers. By the early 1980s, it was clear that Jaguar was being smothered by their holding company's bureaucracy. Then Margaret Thatcher took power after a campaign that promised a government committed to privatization and free market principles. And it was decided that Jaguar's only hope for survival was independence from the state-owned British Leyland. So, in 1984, Jaguar was spun off as a publicly traded company, giving the brand its first taste of freedom in nearly 2 decades. For a brief moment, it seemed like the cure was working. Under new leadership, quality improved dramatically, and Jaguar began to reclaim its reputation for excellence. But independence came with a new vulnerability. Jaguar was now a relatively small player in an industry increasingly dominated by global giants. And that vulnerability was exposed when the recession hit. Luxury car sales plummeted, and Jaguar's finances quickly deteriorated. And the company that had survived world wars and decades of mismanagement now faced a different kind of existential threat. It simply wasn't big enough to weather economic storms alone. So, in 1989, Ford stepped in and acquired Jaguar in what looked like a rescue mission. Ford's acquisition came after a bidding war with General Motors, who had been negotiating for 9 months to buy a stake in Jaguar. GM's approach was to help Jaguar maintain its independence, which Jaguar's chairman Sir John Egan preferred. But Ford's aggressive bid and Jaguar's financial pressures forced the company into Ford's arms. Ford executives were confident they could solve Jaguar's problems with American manufacturing expertise and investment. But when they finally got a good look under the hood of the British car company, they were shocked at what they found. Bill Hayden, the newly minted Jaguar chairman, described the situation to Automotive News this way. It wasn't that Jaguar's quality was bad, it was horrendous. It was a simply terrible organization making terrible cars. Jaguar had let their historic Browns Lane plant in Coventry, England, where many of the iconic Jaguars had been designed and built, severely decline. When Ford bought the company, the plant was being compared to the Gorky car plant in the former Soviet Union. But the real problem wasn't just Jaguar's broken infrastructure, it was also that Ford completely misunderstood the brand they had just bought. Instead of respecting Jaguar's luxury positioning, they worried that the brand wasn't generating enough volume. So they went on a mission to make Jaguar a mass market player. And the Jaguar X-Type perfectly illustrates why this was a terrible decision. The X-Type was Jaguar's attempt to compete with the BMW 3 Series. But instead of creating a genuine Jaguar, they took a Ford Mondeo platform, added some wood trim and leather seats, and called it a Jaguar. The automotive press saw right through it. And Car and Driver wrote, "The X-Type feels like a Ford wearing a Jaguar costume." What Ford had done was take everything that made Jaguar special, the exclusivity, the sophisticated engineering, the predatory elegance, and diluted it for mass appeal. The S-Type suffered from similar compromises. While it looked more authentically Jaguar, it shared major components with Ford's Lincoln LS. And cost-cutting measures further diluted the brand's premium positioning. What Ford failed to understand was that by making Jaguars more accessible, they made them less desirable. The exclusivity that drove Jaguar's appeal was being analytically destroyed by accountants who were afraid of low sales numbers. The results? Under Ford's ownership, Jaguar never made a profit, not once. Despite massive investment and 19 years of trying, Ford couldn't figure out how to make Jaguar work. Next to take an interest was Tata Motors, which acquired Jaguar in 2008. There was hope that new ownership might help recapture Jaguar's rebellious and luxurious past. But instead, Jaguar entered what might have been its most dangerous phase yet, the era of comfortable decline. Under Tata, Jaguar became trapped in automotive purgatory. It had become too mainstream to command Ferrari prices and was too niche to achieve BMW volume. The new management was afraid to go truly upmarket, terrified of abandoning their existing customer base, and most critically, resistant to embracing electric, the most dramatic transformation in the luxury car market since Jaguar's founding. Tesla, founded just 6 years before Tata bought Jaguar, was redefining what luxury cars could be. Elon Musk was selling a vision of the future that made internal combustion engines feel like steam locomotives. Tesla's Model S, launched in 2012, was being snatched up by the exact demographic Jaguar desperately needed to attract. Meanwhile, Jaguar's customer base was aging rapidly, with the average buyer being in their late 50s. But Tesla wasn't Jaguar's only problem. Genesis, Hyundai's luxury division, launched in 2015, was stealing market share with vehicles that offered German engineering quality at more accessible prices, and was attracting buyers in their 30s and 40s who might have considered Jaguar a decade earlier. Porsche showed that traditional luxury brands could successfully transition to electric with the Taycan, launched in 2019, positioned as the most advanced Porsche ever built. Meanwhile, BMW and Mercedes were pouring billions into EV development while maintaining their traditional lineups, gradually introducing electric models alongside their combustion engines. And Jaguar? Well, they continued to be paralyzed by analysis and internal debates. The company had actually developed electric vehicle concepts as early as 2010. The I-Pace, finally launched in 2018, was technically impressive and won awards, but it was seen internally as a side project rather than the future of the brand. While competitors moved decisively into electric luxury, Jaguar continued to hedge their bets, worrying that committing to electric might send a message that would alienate their existing customers. They were also concerned that their traditional design wouldn't work for EVs. You see, one of the things fans loved about Jaguar was its distinctive roar, and EVs do not roar. So, while Tesla's market cap soared, Jaguar sales declined year after year. Market research was showing that when younger luxury buyers were asked about car brands, Jaguar wasn't even making their consideration sets. Tesla was seen as aspirational. Genesis was intriguing. BMW was considered to be reliable. And Jaguar was invisible. It's one thing to lose market share to a superior competitor. It's another thing entirely to realize that customers don't even think about you anymore. By 2022, global sales numbers had crashed. Meanwhile, BMW introduced electric models like the iX and i4 alongside their traditional lineup, allowing customers to choose their own transition timeline, leading to BMW's EV sales rising 32.4% year over year while maintaining their core brand identity. Mercedes-Benz followed a similar path with the EQS and EQC, integrating electric technology into their existing luxury framework. They preserved brand stability by continuing to sell traditional models while developing electric alternatives. Audi grew their EV sales by 50.4%, using the same gradual approach. These companies succeeded by maintaining product flow and gradual transitions. They showed that steady evolution could preserve brand equity while embracing new technology. Tesla proved that revolutionary change could create entirely new markets. Porsche proved that luxury brands could make bold moves without losing their souls. And Genesis proved that new players could enter the luxury market and immediately command premium pricing. Now, Jaguar needed to choose: continue the gradual decline or make a revolutionary bet on a completely different future. Helping to make the decision was the brutal truth that no luxury brand ever wants to acknowledge: that Jaguar's range of current models resulted in close to zero profitability. The automotive press was beginning to write Jaguar's obituary. Articles appeared with titles like "Is Jaguar Becoming Irrelevant?" and "The Slow Death of British Luxury." The brand that had once defined automotive cool was becoming uncool. But impending death can lead to two very different outcomes: paralysis or radical action. For decades, Jaguar had chosen paralysis, making incremental changes, half measures, and compromises. They tried to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to anyone. So, on November 19th, 2024, for the first time in decades, Jaguar made a radical choice that required extraordinary courage: wipe the slate clean and start over. But the rebrand was just the visible manifestation of a much deeper strategic decision. The design of the new Jaguar lineup was so different that Managing Director Rawdon Glover expected only a small percentage of their current buyers would return. Most companies would be terrified of losing a majority of their customer base. But on this day, Jaguar embraced it. The incremental changes that might keep some of those customers happy would also guarantee they'd never attract the customers they needed for long-term survival. Instead of competing with BMW and Audi in the crowded premium segment where they were getting crushed, the new strategy was to go after Bentley and Rolls-Royce in the ultra-luxury space. This would be about selling fewer cars at much higher prices to much wealthier customers. And to prove they were committed to the change, Jaguar intentionally and courageously stopped producing cars at the end of 2024. They discontinued the XE and XF sedans, the F-Type sports car, and most other models, leaving dealers with almost no inventory. When Jaguar returns to the market in 2026, they will be an EV-only brand. Their concept car leading this change is a bold, angular design that looks nothing like any previous Jaguar. Jaguar fans called it everything from brutalist to Cybertruck-like. But that was exactly the point. They aren't trying to please existing Jaguar customers, they are trying to intrigue future ones. And early data suggests the strategy might be working. Brand awareness increased by 33%, and the controversial campaign generated massive global attention, something Jaguar hadn't achieved in years. Most importantly, they're drawing precisely the audience they're aiming for. Google traffic from high-income households has increased by 24%, and it has doubled traffic to the Jaguar website. Sure, some of that was curiosity driven by controversy, but it was the first time in years that people were actively seeking out information about Jaguar. Compare this to what was happening before the rebrand. Jaguar was selling cars at zero profitability to an aging customer base that was shrinking. And they were heading toward irrelevance so slowly that nobody noticed. At least now they have a chance. When I finally understood Jaguar's history, it made Rawdon Glover's decision in 2024 all the more remarkable. For over 50 years, Jaguar's leadership had consistently chosen the path of least resistance, merging when independence felt risky, compromising quality to avoid confrontation, diluting the brand to chase volume, and hedging bets on electric transition rather than fully committing. Each of these safe decisions had slowly strangled the brand that Sir William Lyons had built. But here's the thing. When Glover took the wheel, he faced the very same fundamental choices that each of his predecessors had faced. He had to choose whether to preserve what little remained of the status quo or risk everything on a vision of what Jaguar could become. And after decades of leaders who were too afraid to make the hard choices, Glover chose the kind of bold, uncompromising vision and courage that Lyons himself would have chosen. To copy nothing, delete ordinary, and break molds even when the entire world was watching and waiting for him to fail. Jaguar's case study teaches us something profound about how fear operates in seemingly successful organizations. Fear doesn't usually kill companies quickly. It kills them slowly, decision by decision, compromise by compromise. Jaguar's story also teaches us that before we judge a company too harshly for making what seems like a reckless departure from its past, we should consider that it just may be courage snatching the company's future from the jaws of defeat. Because sometimes the smartest thing you can do is something that looks completely insane to everyone else. And I believe Jaguar's controversial rebrand isn't the beginning of their problems. It's potentially the end of them. As Glover said, to bring back such a globally renowned brand, we had to be fearless. While we don't know if it will work, what we do know is that continuing on the path of slow decline was guaranteed failure. And after 50 years of watching fear systematically destroy one of the world's most iconic brands, it's refreshing to see a company fight for its survival. Thank you for joining me for another episode of A Case Study in Corporate Fear. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more case studies and to further understand the impact fear can have on your company, visit fear-incorporated.com. You will also find the sources and citations used to fact-check this episode.